That's me and my brother. We were both adopted from different families when we were babies. Our stories were very different. As a kid, all I knew was that my mother couldn't take care of me, and when I was 21, my parents shared a bit more. After they got my brother, they immediately applied to get a girl. Years went by, and after time, they began to lose hope. They decided that if they hadn't heard anything by a certain date, they would take down the nursery. That's exactly what happened. And then about 3 months later, they got a call about me. Turns out, I was born 10 weeks early, on the exact date that they had set as their limit. I have to believe that I arrived as fast as I could so that I could be theirs. Knowing that has always made me a little bit more sympathetic to those who have struggled to have families or had to create families in non-traditional ways. I'm extremely fortunate in so many ways, my adopted family, and that when I tried to have my own children, I got pregnant right away, both times. But not everyone is that lucky. So many couples try with no success, or they have to have interventions in order to get pregnant, and others go through painful miscarriages and loss. Still others don't even have the option of having a child through their own pregnancy. My friends are one such case, a loving couple married for 6 years but unable to have children through typical means simply because they're both men. I have never met anyone more enthusiastic, passionate, and excited to have a family. These two loving people have tried all kinds of ways, fostering, adopting, and each time something tragic happens. A few years ago, I watched as a hopeful situation turned bleak. My friends had supported a woman through a pregnancy who had promised to give her child, and it was all through a lawyer and all legit. They paid the bills, they drove her to the doctor, they catered to her every need, and on the big day, she acted as if she didn't know who they were. And that baby went to foster care. It was a complete waste. I watched as my friend, devastated, had to come back to work when he should have been on paternity leave. But a few months later, there was some new hope. I asked what the plan was. He said they'd been donated some embryos. These belonged to a couple who had gone through fertility treatments, had twins, and they had 3 embryos left over. They didn't want to destroy these potential lives, so they donated them to my friends, and now all they had to do was find a woman to carry them. Offhandedly, I mentioned that I'd always thought being a surrogate would be an amazing experience. I enjoyed my pregnancies, I know, and I had easy labors, I know. And then nothing more was said about it. And then a few months later, this very sweet, timid text came through. Remember when you said you'd consider being a surrogate? Did you really mean that? And yes, I did. So we began talking with my husband, with lawyers, with social workers, psychologists, insurance companies. Finally, it was time to meet the fertility doctor. He was wowed by my uterus. He called it a beautiful cavity. I had never heard such flowery language used about my internal organs. I was so proud that my 42-year-old body was a prime host for this fine couple's baby. For weeks, we drove to Indiana for exams and ultrasounds. I took pills and hormones, and my husband had to give me really painful shots in the butt. I didn't care. In March, the transfer day finally came. In the parking lot, I took my Valium, as I was instructed to do, and it took effect pretty quickly. I was giggling as I signed the papers saying that I agreed to do this. I'm not sure why they waited till after I took the pill. They shuffled me into the procedure room, and it seemed as soon as I was on the table, it was practically over. I saw my uterus on the screen, it looked like a flash of light, and then it was done. Those of you who've been through this know that that was the easy part. The worst part is the waiting. For 2 weeks, people were afraid to talk to me, but everyone was really hopeful. Colleagues would pop in their heads and say, "Do you feel pregnant?" I didn't know. It had been 14 years since I had had my second daughter, and I didn't remember what I felt like. 10 days later, back to Indy for a blood test. It was a 2-hour drive for a 30-second blood draw, and then the news, negative. Minutes later, my friends were calling. We were all crying on the phone. They wanted to make sure I was okay. Yes, I was okay. It was them I was worried about. We had a second try, and a third, we thought. A week before the second attempt, more bad news. The remaining 2 embryos were frozen together, so we had no choice but to thaw them both. Carrying twins just didn't seem like an option because of my age, so we decided to refreeze the 3rd embryo. The next attempt was really smooth, but everyone was really serious this time. They talked differently. For the first time, they reminded us about the age of the embryos, and no longer was the doctor saying things like, "This is gonna happen." He was saying, "Good luck." Just as before, I followed every instruction to the letter, and then more bad news. They called and said the 3rd embryo didn't survive, so this was our only shot. I meditated, I prayed, I relaxed, I did everything I was told, but it wasn't meant to be. 2 weeks later, my friend and I spent our lunch break in the lab of Cara having my blood drawn. I think watching all the hope drain from my friend's face was one of the hardest things that I've ever been through. I felt as if my body had let us all down. I tell you this story because this isn't the end of their story. I'm hoping that out there tonight or later, someone who sees this online will know about a path, an avenue to help them become the fathers that they want to be. Maybe adoption, maybe foster care, maybe embryos. They know that I'm still open for business. So, who knows? But with knowledge is power, and we know that it takes a village to raise a child. In this case, and in so many cases, it takes a village to create a family. Thank you.